In this video, we're going to give you an overview of Imaginomics Portraiture Photoshop plugin. The plugin is designed to alleviate the tediousness of skin retouching, and as most of you probably know, skin retouching can take up a lot of time, and it can also be difficult to duplicate across similar images. The purpose of the plugin is to allow you to do this really quick, really fast, and also to be able to batch process this. So let's dive in and see what we can do with it. Portraiture is a standard Photoshop filter. It's run from the filter menu, Imaginomic and Portraiture. We're going to use a basic sample here to kind of show you what Portraiture can do. As you can see on the image, we've got quite a bit of variation in skin tone here. We've got a lot darker looking skin up here, and it goes down into some light areas here. We've got some little wrinkles that's going on under the eyes and up here in the forehead and all. I'm going to show you how Portraiture can help minimize these and get them out. And the basics of skin retouching is if you go overboard with it, it's always going to look fakey and all that, and it's very difficult to go in Photoshop and achieve something like this and get all these tones to match up in a really quick and easy manner. So we're going to run Portraiture. Again, it's filter, Imaginomic, Portraiture, and as you notice here, I've got a hotkey assigned. I'm running this on a PC. You can do the same thing on a Mac. It's a very good thing to get used to in a workflow. I could just press Control P and run it without having to move my mouse all over the place. And as we come into Portraiture, we've got it set for default settings. And when it comes in, we've got a preview area here in the middle that shows the preview area. I can switch it to a left and right view. And as you can see, it's already made some changes to the image itself. You can see how much smoother it is up in here. You can see the changes have been made on the tones a little bit, and this is in default mode. And if we wanted to tweak this image out a little bit, a simple thing we would do here is we'd bring threshold up, bring large all the way up, we pull fine back down. These settings here determine how much of each level of skin retouching is being done. We'll go into a little bit more detail on them later, but I'm just going to show you how easy it is to get this image up there, and then we can save a default for it. The portrait size, we're going to set that to a medium size. That basically determines the output size, which is very important in a standard Photoshop workflow. You have to edit towards your output. You can't use the same type of edits for web-based images as you do for 30 by 40 prints or anything in between. And that's one of the differences in having high quality output and having just standardized output like most everybody else does. I'm going to go back to the main preview here. We're going to zoom in now, and you can see the changes that I made up here now. You see an even more of a tonal change there, and you see everything starting to smooth out a little bit. Even the edges of the hair are starting to smooth out, which is a very important part of a retouch. So this right here, just by moving the sliders and keeping the default settings, we've got a pretty nice looking image. I'm going to tweak it a little bit further. I'm going to grab a hold of a mask color selector here, and what this does is it goes out into the image. You'll see over on the right hand side, you'll see color tones being selected, and I'm going to select some of these nastier tones up here in the head. I'm going to click on them, and you see some of the other stuff comes back in, and I'm just going to move my cursor around watching the mask and select the areas that look like they match up with the facial area there, and then the edges of the hair, because again, that's a very important part of a retouch. Is most of the time the hair doesn't match the facial retouch. The hair's got just too much detail, it's got too much flyaway look to it, it doesn't have an evenness to it. And that's a very overlooked factor in the skin retouching process, is the surrounding hair, especially on ladies. So we go from that is the retouch, that's the before, and you'll see there's still a little bit of variation in the tones going on up in there like that. So it's just a simple matter on the warmth. We can just kind of pull a little bit of warmth off of that area up in there. And you see now that there's a lot better match going on there with the skin tones in there around the face and all, because we got a lot of light coming in on this side over here. We got a main light is kind of down low a little bit on this, so the lighting does match. We got more of a shadow area going back in like this. As we zoom in on the image, we'll notice that we still have that pore structure going on there. We even still got the little tiny wrinkles up under the eyes there, little things up here going on in the head. But the thing is, this is a smaller image. A maximum size you'd want to print on this would be an 8 by 10. And those little tiny details like that, the software is not designed to go in and just get rid of every small individual thing like this, because that's all really an inherent part of an image. Some people want these little things left in there. It's just a simple matter of going out into Photoshop, running a clone brush across there with one wipe at about 20% opacity. Same thing if you wanted to get rid of these. But the whole idea is that if we're going to print these at 8x10s, this is a really good look for this image. We'll show the side-by-side preview again. And as you can see, a lot of that evenness over here that we have, how splotchy it looks, and all this stuff here. It doesn't take away from the image any. We're not messing with the eyes. We're not destroying any of the details in the eyes. In fact, I can go over here and I can pull sharpness up about, say, about halfway, and I can actually get some more sharpness around the edges of the eyes there and around the edges of those eyebrows in there. The pore structure kind of stands out a little bit further. The idea being here is that even though we went through several different steps, we talked about this, we go to default settings here. We move the sliders over in this manner. And the reason we don't have them that way to start with is because a lot of people like working in default. The fine controls the pore level structure of the skin. The medium controls a little bit bigger areas, say like about 1/2 inch to inch square type patches that are in the skin. The large works on the whole contrast tone of the image as a whole. And then the threshold itself actually controls how much of the process is being done. Like here's totally turned off, and this is maxed out all the way, like this. What's so nice about it is we have the ability, once we have something like this, just say we had a sheet and we have this same model in here, and we've got a bunch of different poses and so forth going on. We can come up here and we can save this out as a preset. We can give it a preset name. Being that I've already worked on an image similar to this already, I'm just going to call it like Jam Face 2. And in the preset group itself, we can either call it a custom preset or we select one that's already there, and then we can give it a note. What's nice about this, you can come back later and you know why you did that particular retouch. You know what the purpose was. And if you're also on top of a network in a studio environment or something, you're sharing these things with other people, you have the ability to share them. They'll know what you're doing, or you'll know what they're doing if you bring up a preset on there. Because in the preset manager, we have the ability to store the presets on any type of a network situation. That way we could have multiple systems using the same presets, and anytime anybody updated or changed any of the presets, it would automatically update across all the machines that are on that network in real time. We have the standard undo and redo that we have in Photoshop, just like that. We got the left arrow and the right arrow. We got Control Z or Control Alt Z. We also have a running history that shows basically what we've done from the beginning when we opened up with initial settings. We also have a thumbnail history that shows what each of those settings does, and the thumbnail history is resizable. So you could go through here and start looking, you go, wow, between those two like that, I like that. Or you're yakking on the phone, you forgot what you did, why you did it, and you go back through here and you go, ooh, what a big change between this guy, and how did I actually get down to this guy? So we give you the ability to visually look at your history, which is really nice without having to scroll through it. And you could just select it, click on it, there it goes back to initial settings, which were settings from a previous image on there. Set it back to default. And any of the presets themselves has the same ability. We have names of the presets, we have the descriptions of the presets, and then we have thumbnails, which work in the same way. The thumbnails show the preset name, then they show a little note on the preset. We have several presets default all the way down here to the enhanced low key are all built into it. They're hard-coded into the plugin itself. The rest of these are just some custom ones I've added for this particular scenario here. Just like this, when I click on it, bam, immediately applies to the image. There's before and there's after. If we get down into the skin tones mask, we can see that we have the ability to control several parameters here that work on the actual mask itself. And one of the things I've got to mention here is that the mask that Portraiture generates is not exactly the same thing that Photoshop generates. Some of you may be familiar with layer masks in Photoshop and generating masks and so forth with skin selections and a lot of different methods out there. But ours is a combination of several things. We make our own type of mask because we're actually outside of Photoshop now, and then we combine it back in with the skin that's in the original image. So the mask looks a little bit different. It's mainly just to give you an idea about what's going to be affected overall. And again, we wanted the hair, some of the hair and edges in here to be pulled into this mask to give it that really smooth edge look as the skin blends up into the hair. So this is what the mask itself looks like on a white background. And this is what the mask looks like on a black background. And this is with it turned off. Now the feathering, what the feathering does is the feathering actually feathers the edges of the mask. You can see it's pretty rough, hard edge now. The more feathering we apply to it, the softer the edges of the mask gets. Sometimes you may want a harder edge mask. There may be reasons you want to go in later in Photoshop and do some edge contrasting using a hard edge mask. We give you the ability to do that. The opacity actually brings back the original image. You can see the original image is starting to come back in there the lower the opacity is. Sometimes you want to blend some of the original image back in with the mask itself. This gives you the ability to do that. The fuzziness setting controls how much of the skin tone colors is selected here. And as I start backing off to the left, just like fuzziness in most any program, the farther down you go, the less it's going to be selected. The more up you go, the more it's going to be selected. In general, you want to leave everything set at 100%. This area here with the color box here actually shows the range of colors being selected. Everything within this box here is the range of colors over here. And we can actually manipulate this box here. There's several ways we can do it. We can actually just grab, hold, and drag the box around. You see the colors are changing on the right-hand side. We can grab edges of the box and just pull in, and as they shrink down, you see that the colors change according to where the colors are in here. And then we can move it around. This is one way of fine-tuning a mask visually. We can also select the hue down in here, that this little cursor, as you can see, wherever the center part is, this part down in here is going to be the hue. So we can actually move that back and forth, and you can see the mask changes in there. Again, it's another visual way of selecting skin tones. You can actually grab and you can stretch that out or pull it down. It works the same way in both boxes, just by grabbing the edge of the box itself. Stretching gives you more, pulling it in like this gives you less. Another easy way of fine-tuning the mask. And then you can do this visually. You can turn it back to Show Mask None, and you can sit here like this and just move it in, and you can see it change. See it change. There's less selection, there's more selection. Some people prefer this method of just going through once they've made a standard selection and just fine-tuning the mask that way. The HSL, or hue, saturation, and luminance controls here give you the ability to actually control what hues of the image itself, of the mask that you're working with. In most cases, very few people work with these here. Some people like the ability to use them because they're used to HSL controls. We've given you that ability to use them if you need, but in all general purposes, it just kind of shows you the values and what's going on in this box up here. With the latitude control here, the latitude just controls the size of this box up here. If I move it to the left, it's going to make it smaller. If I move it to the right, it's going to make it larger. These two controls here are the actual controls that you use, the little droppers, to pick your mask colors. Now the first one, the first dropper here on the left, is by default, that's the dropper you want to start with. If you come out into the image, and as you saw from the previous selection I made on it, I just come into usually right around the middle of the forehead is really a good area in there, because most of the light, especially if you're using contrast lighting with some ratios on it or so forth, that's where most of the contrast starts kind of keying off and going from lighter to darker areas. So right in there is kind of a good area to make the first initial selection. And then as you make the selection, the cursor automatically goes out from that point and kind of gives you more areas there to select. And then you can just move the cursor around watching the preview over here. Once you get an area that you say, well, that covers it, doesn't look like it's catching a lot, but again, the mask is kind of fool you, because we're just wanting to work with those really nasty tonal change areas in there. We grab them, and then we say, well, it didn't quite get that one area there. One more click, and bam, it did it. So now you got a much more evenness of the skin going on there, and we did it in 3 clicks, which is the purpose of this. We go back here. We head off here to names only. We set it back to default. We move this cursor 1, 2, 3. Show that it's on medium. We got the skin tones mask, which is auto, which means as it comes into the plug-in, it's going to set it to automatically try to select the skin tones in there. We're going to manually select the skin tones here. We're going to pick the mask color. We go up to the middle of the forehead. We click. We go to this little spotchy area here. Bam. And we say we want a little bit more in here like this. Boom. 1, 2, 3. So we actually had 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 clicks to get this effect here. And then if we want to take a little bit of this warmth out of this area here, we just go down to the warmth slider, we back it off. It much better matches the overall skin tone there. We're going to look at the left and right before and after. As you can see, there's quite a bit of difference from there to there. And at the same time, we're retaining a lot of that skin structure that's inherent to the image, which is very important to having detail and resolution, especially when you start upsizing images. This is very, very important. I'm going to kind of move on down a little bit over here and go through a little bit more. The enhancement section, what that basically does is we've given you some sharpness and softness. Some people like to put softness in an image, especially a lot of the old school guys. They like to dial it up and give it a little soft, like you're using the pantyhose over the lens or a little bit of Vaseline over the lens to give it that kind of soft, glamoury look. We've got the sharpening function in here that will overall sharpen the image. It's designed to just work on edge contrast areas. You see, it'll actually sharpen the pore areas in there. That's a little bit much for an image like that on the print. Normally on something about this size, say an 8x10, about 20 is a real good sharpening point. We have a lot of professionals out there that use this sharpening feature inside of portraiture, never touch anything else. They don't use anything in ACR. They don't use anything in any of the capture programs or any of the Photoshop plugins or tools for sharpening. They use this right here because it does such a good job of not haloing or giving you a kind of really fakey, over-sharp look. We go down to the warmth. Basically what the warmth does is the warmth, if this is checked, this box here is checked, it's going to work only on that mask we generated, which would be this area here. So we can either take warmth away from that mask, as you can see it overall, pull the skin tone down, or we can add a little bit of warmth to it. In this case, we want to just take a tiny bit away, not much, to kind of better match everything around. And then on the tint has mainly two functions. You go to the right, it adds more yellow. You go to the left, it adds more magenta. Right is mainly for type Western, like Caucasian type skin tones, where yellow is more, prevalent in addition to making the skin tone look more natural. And then to the left adds magenta to the image, which is for darker skin races, because magenta is a big part of the skin tones in darker skin races. And the brightness and contrast, those are pretty self-explanatory. If I pull them down, it's going to darken the image. And if I go up, it's going to brighten the image. Now you notice we don't do overly bright or overly dark. We don't go down to where it's just totally black. We don't go up where it's totally blasted on there. We kind of limit the range to usefulness. And then we have the contrast setting. It's basically the same way. If we go to the right, we're going to add more contrast to the mask. If we go to the left, we're going to take contrast away from the mask. And the functions behind those is that you could very easily just come in and kind of give it a little bit of a tone, a little bit more of a shadow tone to the image there. You see how the kind of more shadows come into the image there like that. The eyes are starting to pop out there. And you can give it a more overall contrasty look just with these controls right here like this. If the use mask is on, these features here, warmth, tint, brightness, and contrast, are going to work on the mask only. Sharpness and softness is a global setting. It works over the whole image. If this is on, then that means the enhancements are actually going to be on. If it's off, the enhancements are going to be off. If I turn the use mask off, it's going to work over the whole image itself. So you can see the difference with use mask on is only working on the masked areas, and it's applying these settings here to them. With use mask off, it's working overall. So if I add contrast, it's going to overall contrast to the image. Turn the use mask back on. There it is. Back to basically the original is here. And here's the output retouch. Now up top here, we've got a few little features. We've got an add preview feature. I'm going to kind of go over real quick. As you can see, as I click, it's just adding previews. And this gives you the ability, if you're sitting with a client and you make a change to something, and then you've got another one back here, and you say, well, let's go the other way. Let's get reverse contrast. And then we got the original. So we can go, there's the original, there's reverse contrast, there's added positive contrast. So it gives you a quick way of making some changes and just kind of flipping through them without having to mess with the sliders. That way a person can make a kind of a good idea about what they want to get on there. I'm going to delete those by clicking on the little X's up there. Go back to the original. In the bracketing function, what the bracketing does, the bracketing gives you the ability to set a parameter, which the parameters are basically, you can see whatever the parameter is listed here, it just kind of goes down and does a drill down over here on the left side like this. So if I say on the parameter threshold, I want to show a number of previews of 7, and then I want it to bracket the step of 6. What it's going to do is going to look at what the threshold is now. It's going to throw 7 previews up here, and it's going to bracket the steps between this, and it's going to be intelligent enough to bracket them out, and it's going to replace the open previews. I click OK, builds them really fast. So you see it starts out threshold at 4. You can see it's pretty blotchy. We go to threshold of 10. We just keep going up. And this, again, this gives you ability to kind of show somebody really quick, some steps in there. Gives you also the ability to kind of experiment with the software without having to sit over here and move sliders and look, move sliders and look. You can just do the bracketing. You can go through there and go, hey, I like that one right there. Let's save that as a preset. So we can come over here and save it as a preset. So it's a real functional feature there. And what's also nice about it is that you have the same paradigm that we have in our previews and in our presets over there, showing you, actually what each one of these windows are. But then you have the thumbnails that show you as well, and they're very incised thumbnails over here. So you could actually scroll down through there really fast without even having to go through the steps of the tabs on the preview over there, and then you go, ooh, I like that one. You just click it, bam, it applies it to it immediately. The fast preview and the accurate up here on some of the older Macs, we had a little trouble with it showing up, with the preview in their very accurate mode. So we put that there. In most cases, you just leave it right where it is on fast preview. As we go down in here to the bottom of the preview window itself, we've got minus and plus, which are pretty self-explanatory. You keep clicking, the image gets bigger, go up to 800%. 100% is actual image size. You also have drop down here that you can pull in best fit, whatever size you want on it. We've got keyboard shortcuts here. As we right click or command click, you see they pop up in the image there, show you some of the keyboard shortcuts that you can use, which is always a good thing to learn in any software, using keyboard shortcuts. That way you don't have to keep taking your hand over your mouse, putting it back over the keyboard, back and forth, back and forth. You can do a lot of things internally without actually having to use the mouse, which is good for you because it works out with the carpal tunnel and the repetitive stress and all that stuff. As you've been doing as long as I have, this stuff start really catching up with you. All right, close that booger out. We're going to head back over here to the right-hand top side. I'm going to click the About button. It brings up the About screen, and we've got the ability to check internally for updates. We've also got a Preferences here. If we click that, we have the Preferences screen comes up. And one of the main things when you first start using the software is it defaults, by default, it defaults to a latitude of 40. What that equates to is over here on this latitude button, if I select this first cursor, I click on the image, it's automatically going to set the latitude to 40. In other words, it's going to select a range of colors that's going to fall down here within the 40 range itself. So if I do that and click on it, I'm going to select, in most cases, I'm going to kind of over-select colors. I'm going to get too many of them. So what I recommend is that you put it down, say around 23, 24. And this auto switch to expand mask color, that just works on this mask preview over here that automatically just expands the mask out. The interface, we give the ability to tweak the interface out there. In most cases, I never touch it because I'm a firm believer in a neutral interface. That's one of the another things that can give you some real good performance in your workflow is having neutral interfaces. One thing about the Mac is that it always has the background in there that's kind of intrusive on you as you're actually doing image editing. So as I recommend that in the Mac scenarios that you try to maximize the image area itself out and then hide all the other programs you have running in the background. This neutral gray and white and all this is very easy on the eyes. It doesn't really give you the tendency to skew colors as you're looking back and forth between bright colors while you're editing. Your eyes can actually become accustomed to these bright colors and can cause you to skew your perception of what the colors are on the screen. So in most cases, we just leave these settings here as they are standard. In the performance part here, we have multiprocessor support. Most cases, auto is fine, but sometimes you want to go in and actually tell it how many processors you have. We support up to 8 processors. It'll actually multi-thread and use all those processors. The thumbnail cache down here is just determinative of how many thumbnails that you're going to be using in the default drop downs here that drop down for each one of the, like the previews and the presets and so forth and the histories. In most cases, you just leave it where it is. Sometimes people have a little less memory on their system and they can bump down the cache down a little bit on there and it'll give them better overall performance when it's building it. But in most cases, these are fine settings here. As we go down the right-hand side here, we have some output functionality. And we have basically three output functionalities. We have current layer, we have new layer, and then we have new document. A current layer, what it does is it takes the settings here as they show here, and it applies it to the current layer. So all it does is just lay them right on top of the current layer. It doesn't duplicate it, doesn't make a mask. It just puts the settings and applies them over there to that layer right there. The new layer actually generates a new layer, and if this box here is checked, it will create this mask in Photoshop as a new layer. That gives you the ability to add a transparency mask or adjust the opacity or make other little tweaks to it to fine-tune it. If we do a new document, then what it does is it just creates a duplicate of the original document, applies the settings to it, so you have the original document, and then right beside it you have a duplicate with the Portraiture plugin settings applied to it. The only place that the Create Transparency Mask works at is in the new layer. And the other one, to current layer, it's grayed out, you can't get to it. And in new document, you can't get to it because you're not going to create a transparency mask on there. We're just going to do it with a new layer. The mask preview itself, I just collapsed it. If the arrows point down, it expands it out. The mask preview is basically whatever's selected as the skin tones here. And the auto expand itself was explained it in the preferences. That turns it on. These are the colors that show up as the color picker moves around. And as you can see, we're showing HSL and RGB values plus the skin tone patch here. So as we move around, and if we get into anything that's not really considered to be, like a skin tone, see like in their eye, it'll say there in the H, it'll say not a skin color. As we go down to the navigator is the same type of navigator that you're probably familiar with in Photoshop, with a floating box that wherever you move it, it's going to automatically move around the screen and update on the screen. Overall, that's a quick overview of the software, how it works. I'm going to bring up another image here in a second and show you some little tweaks that you can do to get a little bit of variation in it. But as far as the generalized use of the plugin, the settings that we've been down through here, how it works on here, would work with pretty much any type of standard portrait image out there in the industry. I'm going to click it, new layer, would create transparency mask. I'll show you what I'm talking about. Go here to the layer, and there's the background copy with the transparency mask sitting on top of that. We can come down here. We can select that background layer, come down here, and we can put a transparency mask on there. Come over and select our brush, get our default colors back. We could paint black in there, and that would bring back some of the background image from the back there. We could fine-tune it even further by just making changes to the opacity on it. And that completes our overview of the Imaginomic Portraiture plugin for Photoshop. If you have any further questions on this tutorial, just leave an email to george@imaginomic.com and I'll be happy to get back with you. Thanks.